Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Brewer's Minute. So, the last week or two has been all about Modern Masters 2017. That's been all anyone's talking about. The set is so crazy. So, this week for our Brewer's Minute, I wanted to take some of the abstract elements of the crazy reprints we're seeing in Modern Masters 2017 and kind of apply them to real life. So, as you know, we play a lot of budget decks, kind of budget-friendly decks, and today we're not talking about budget in specific, but we're talking about 5 cards that have really had a huge impact on making decks more accessible in the real world. So when we see fetch lands reprinted and they get cheaper, or Damnation and it gets cheaper, that's awesome. You can see the numbers dropping. It was $80 for Scalding Tarn, now it's $40 for Scalding Tarn. You can get Scalding Tarn for a lot cheaper than you could before. And that's great. And everyone loves that, and they should love that. That's a great thing for the game in general. But sometimes it's worth it to really dig in and see what these reprints do as far as what decks can I go out and play for cheaper now? Like, how does this really impact me playing Magic? Like, a Scalding Tarn by itself being cheaper is awesome, but you don't play Magic with just a Scalding Tarn. You need a deck. You need the whole picture. You need to be able to see all of that. So that's what we're doing today. So we're going to be talking about 5 Modern Masters 2017 cards in specific that I think are going to have a really huge impact on making certain decks more accessible, and kind of talk about what those decks are and what these cards do. So before we get to our 5 cards, a quick reminder: if you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be super awesome of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down in the corner of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So first off on our list, and these are in no particular order, is Gifts Ungiven. So Gifts Ungiven, it might not seem that crazy, and that's one of the things about these cards is we're not really looking at, oh, this card went from $80 to $50. That's great, but it's still $50. In a real world sense, having a card that goes from $10 or $12 or $15 to $3 or $4 or $5 has a lot bigger of an impact for a lot more players, because you might actually buy a $5 Gifts Ungiven, where a lot of people aren't going to buy Scalding Tarn if it's $80 or if it's $50 or $40. It's still just a lot of money for a lot of people. But having a card go from 15 to 5 does bring it into a lot of people's price range. So that's the great thing about Gifts Ungiven. Gifts Ungiven was like $12, now it's like $4 or $5, could go even lower. And the most exciting part about Gifts is it has a ready-made home, and not only does it have a ready-made home, it has a ready-made home with a bunch of other cards that were reprinted. So the home for Gifts Ungiven is the Brawl Storm deck, primarily. We played it on Mucha Brew a little while ago, so if you want to see it in action, go check out the Mucha Brew for Brawl Storm, and the deck is really good. I apparently stumbled my way through it, and we still went like 4-1, and it's put up a lot of good finishes lately, but Gifts Ungiven, key piece of that deck, a lot cheaper than it was. Past in Flames, reprinted. Serum Visions, reprinted again. And if you're building the optimal version of the deck, Scalding Tarn is also in that deck. You can get by with the cons fetch lands, but if you do want to play the absolutely optimal build of Brawl Storm, you're going to want Scalding Tarn, and getting it for 40 instead of 80 is a huge deal. So suddenly this deck becomes significantly more accessible, and the deck is really solid. And this doesn't even include some sideboard stuff, like Blood Moon shows up in the sideboard a lot. That's reprinted, so that gets cheaper. So big impact reprint number 1, Gifts Ungiven. Moving on our list is Gobbling Guide. So we talked about this on our Brewer's Minute last week, and when we were talking about irreplaceable cards. And Gobbling Guide is not irreplaceable. If you're going to build a budget red aggro deck, you can play Swift Spear, you don't lose that much. However, a lot of the best aggro decks are going to play Gobbling Guide and Swift Spear. So if you're playing like Mono Red Burn or something like that, you really want both of them. Your best starts are when you can go like turn 1 1-drop, turn 2 double 1-drop, back that up by a bunch of burn spells to get prowess triggers and deal damage, and you don't get those draws as much if you have just Swift Spear. But now that Goblin Guide is like $20 or maybe $15, and I think it will drop more, it's way more possible that you can do this and still be on a budget. Not only does it help these burn decks, our 8-whack Goblins deck, suddenly you can play a much more powerful version of that deck with Goblin Guides, because Goblin Guides, while still not cheap, are not deal breaking anymore because of this reprint. So this opens up a lot of different avenues for different styles of decks. Mono Red Bird, Goblins, various red-green aggro decks with Burning Tree Emissary, another reprint from the set, Zoo decks, there's so many different things, Naya Bird, things with the Tarkus command, there's a ton of decks that this goes in, and suddenly you have the option to play these without putting out $120 or $140 for a playset of Goblin Guides. Next on our list, and you probably knew this was coming because I love Blood Moon. Blood Moon is a sneaky important reprint. It might seem like, oh, this only goes in really specific decks, and to some extent it is true. Blood Moon doesn't go everywhere, but Blood Moon was really expensive. It's much cheaper now, likely to keep dropping, I think, more so than a lot of other cards, because people, I don't know, they tend to underestimate it. A lot of people are not big Blood Moon fans, but it does have a very devoted following, probably led by me. So what are you going to do with these new cheap Blood Moons? Well, the most tier option is to play Green-Red Panza, the Green-Red Land Destruction deck. We played a budget, very budget version without Blood Moons a long time ago. We may have played it on stream or something too, but basically it's a Land Destruction deck, and Blood Moon is one of the key pieces. It slows your opponent down, lets you kind of pick and choose what lands you need to hit with your Land Destruction spells. So getting cheaper Blood Moons is a big game for that deck. However, Bonfire of the Dam, back in Modern Masters 2017. That's another 4 of in the deck. Thragtusk shows up in the deck. Primal Command puts land on top of a deck, can shuffle it in, or can search up like your Thragtusk or Inferno Titan. So you got a ton of reprints for Green Red Panza. And that doesn't even mention the fact that, for example, Skred Red needs the Blood Moons. Freewind Red, one of my all-time favorite decks. You need the Blood Moons. There's a lot of different places this goes. We mentioned the sideboard for a Storm deck, so there's a ton of places you can put your Blood Moons to use, even beyond Green Red Panza, which is probably one of the most fun and cheapest ways to do it. The total deck price isn't too bad on this one compared to a lot of decks, so keep that in mind as you're trying to find a place to play that new Blood Moon you opened in your Modern Masters 2017 box. Coming up next, and this is kind of a dark horse candidate, Zur the Enchanter. Obviously, is not a tier Modern card. This is more of a Commander reprint. However, people do play Zur decks and have success with them on occasion in Modern. And maybe the most appealing part of Zur decks, which are enchantment based, you're kind of looking to Voltron something up by tutoring out enchantment. Sometimes you have Geist of St. Traff, which has gotten cheaper since it was in a dual deck. So there's a lot of pieces, but the most appealing part of the Zur decks is it takes advantage of all the big uncommon reprintings, or most of the big uncommon reprintings for Modern Masters 2017. So cheaper Zur, and Zur was climbing to like $10 based on Commander demand and fringe Modern demand, and now it's going to be close to bulk. So instead of spending $40 on a playset, you're going to spend less than 10, I would assume, once things are said and done. So not only do you get a huge discount there, Path to Exile Inquisition, almost always 4-ofs in those decks, tons cheaper with the reprinting, and even Lingering Souls, which isn't super expensive, is going to be cheaper than it was before because it's back in Modern Masters 2017. Last but not least, we have Flicker Wisp, which is a sneaky, expensive uncommon. So why it wasn't super expensive, it was like $4 before, and it's going to be way cheaper now with yet another reprinting. And Flicker Wisp actually does 2 specific things, and maybe the most exciting for like not budget players, but budget conscious players are the decks that this enables. So first off, there's like mono white hate bears or mono white blink bears. I don't know what you want to call it exactly, but it's essentially kind of like a hate bear, a Thalia type deck, except it's mono white and it's using a ton of Modern Masters cards. So you got Flicker Wisp itself, you get Blade Splicer, gonna be super cheap now. You get Restoration Angel, which was sneakily expensive at like $8 a copy, gonna be like $3 a copy, and Path to Exile. So suddenly, like half of the most important cards in that deck are gonna be half price or something. So if you're looking for a deck that is definitely not tier 1, but does occasionally win 5-0s at Magic Online leagues, shows up in IQs and stuff, this is definitely an option for a slightly above budget friendly type option thanks to these reprintings. The other one is kind of helped by Ranger of Eos, which was another card that was like $10. It's dropped down to like 5, could go lower than that, but that is Soul Sisters. So Soul Sisters, we played Norin Sisters before at white-red version of Soul Sisters, but the most common version is probably mono white. Flicker Wisp, key part of it, Ranger of Eos searches up your Soul Sisters, including Soul Warden, which was also reprinted in Modern Masters 2017, and you get advantage of having Stony Silence at a bottom of the barrel discount rate thanks to the Modern Masters 2017 reprinting. So, in sum, these are some practical, real-world examples of how Modern Masters 2017 reprints are making decks more accessible, cheaper, more available for you to play, for me to play, for everyone to play. And instead of spending $600, you can spend $500, $400. And while that might not seem like, oh my god, Magic is so cheap now, and it's not. Magic is always going to be somewhat expensive. That's the nature of collectible card games. It is a meaningful difference. That is enough that some people who wouldn't buy a deck before are going to get it now, and you have many more options now that are competitive. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 2.5, like real competitive decks that can compete in Modern for $300, $350, $400, when it wasn't that long ago that if you wanted to play competitive Modern, $600, $700, $800, $1,500, like you were going to have to put out a ton of money. But in part because of Modern Masters 2017, and in part because of these 5 reprints that are super exciting, the format has gotten much more accessible, so make sure to take advantage of these Modern Masters 2017 reprints. If you've been waiting to buy a sweet new deck in Modern, this is a great time to do it. Well, not today, but in a couple of weeks as the supply hits the market. But take advantage of these reprints. There's tons of really sweet, somewhat below the radar decks that these cards enable, and this is your time to pick up Green Red Ponza, or Soul Sisters, or Mono White Blink Bears, or a Blood Moon deck, or all these things. There's so many options. Zur the Enchanter, if you've always wanted to try a Zur deck, this is your time to do it because the prices are going to be reasonable, and these reprints really make it accessible. So anyway, let me know in the comments what cards you're most excited about. What deck do you want to build that maybe you couldn't build before because it was just too expensive, but now with Modern Masters 2017 and these reprints and these cheaper prices, you're going to take the plunge. So what are you excited to build? Not just the card. Like I said, the abstract, oh, Scalding Tarn is $40 cheaper, that's great. But in the real world, what does this do for you playing Magic, these reprints? What deck are you making now that you couldn't make before or refused to make before because you didn't want to spend the money? That's what I'm excited for, and that's what I want to hear. So let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.